From the moment German generals first glimpsed the sprawling, chaotic columns of American trucks rolling across the shattered roads of France, a quiet disbelief settled over their command posts. To them, war had always been measured in artillery, tanks, and well-drilled infantry, yet here was a spectacle of industrial endurance that defied conventional logic. A seemingly endless line of olive-drab trucks surged over bridges, through bombed-out villages and across open fields, each vehicle bearing the lifeblood of Patton's advancing forces: fuel, ammunition, and food. For weeks, the generals had relied on their meticulous calculations, expecting that the Allies would be constrained by logistics as any other army had been. Yet the Americans seemed to laugh at the old rules, turning their supply network into a living, breathing engine that pulsed with mechanical precision. Suspicion mixed with awe as senior officers whispered among themselves, each secretly questioning if they had underestimated the industrial might of the United States. What they could not see yet, hidden in the shadows of their disbelief, was that this logistical marvel would soon accelerate into something unstoppable, a force that would fuel Patton's relentless advance like gasoline poured onto a roaring fire. The Red Ball Express, as the Americans called it, was not just a supply line. It was a promise of velocity, endurance, and an unforeseen tactical revolution that the Wehrmacht had never anticipated. The men who plotted campaigns on maps, tracing the arcs of potential offensives with rulers and compasses, now found themselves confronted with the unpredictable, American ingenuity in motion. Hundreds of miles behind the front, warehouses hummed with activity, and roads became arteries of movement, lined with the constant rhythm of engines, each carrying precious cargo that would decide the fate of battles yet to come. For the generals accustomed to seeing armies falter when supply lines strained, the sight was almost blasphemous. Trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks surged forward day and night, crews working in rotation so grueling that exhaustion became irrelevant, replaced by a machine-like determination that seemed almost supernatural. Bridges were repaired faster than they could be destroyed. Convoys moved in tight formations, despite constant harassment from Luftwaffe fighters and partisan attacks. Each obstacle was met with an audacious improvisation, a testament to the American capacity for adaptation. And with each passing day, the Wehrmacht's skepticism began to waver, replaced by a grudging recognition that something extraordinary was underway. In these hours of tension and confusion, the first seeds of awe were planted, even in the hearts of men trained to fear nothing but overconfidence. Yet beneath this spectacle of mechanical endurance was a meticulous choreography, a network of planning so intricate that only decades later would historians fully comprehend its genius. Dispatchers coordinated routes, maintenance crews patched and repaired vehicles at impossible speeds, and drivers, many barely trained, relied on instinct, maps, and sheer courage to navigate the perilous terrain. Fuel was distributed with pinpoint accuracy. Rations were timed to meet the needs of armored divisions, and ammunition flowed uninterrupted to tanks, artillery, and infantry. The American system, though improvisational at first glance, was an intricate dance of logistics, a rhythm that the Germans could neither interrupt nor anticipate. For the generals observing from their vantage points in Normandy and beyond, this was an uncomfortable revelation. War was no longer solely about tactics and firepower. It was about speed, consistency, and the ability to keep a complex machine running without faltering under pressure. And as the trucks rolled endlessly, so did a new fear that their calculations, strategies, and preconceived notions of victory might be outpaced not by guns, but by the unstoppable heartbeat of American industry and determination. As the sun dipped below the horizon on yet another day of relentless convoys, the generals retreated to their maps, trying desperately to forecast the unpredictable. In their minds, the Red Ball Express was a temporary miracle, a flash of logistical brilliance that could be disrupted with patience and cunning. Yet even as they plotted ambushes, air raids, and counterattacks, a subtle dread began to creep in. The Americans were already thinking 5 steps ahead, anticipating shortages, breakdowns, and fatigue with contingencies that made the Wehrmacht's best-laid plans appear fragile. The silence of their command rooms was thick with tension, punctuated only by the distant roar of engines moving inexorably toward the front. In the shadows of doubt and disbelief, a narrative of inevitability formed. Patton's forces would not merely advance, they would surge forward, fed by the lifeblood of an industrial miracle, leaving a trail of astonishment and defeat in their wake. And as the night fell, cloaking the French countryside in darkness, The first true realization struck the German generals with a chilling clarity. They had underestimated not just the Americans' courage, but their ability to turn logistics into an instrument of war, one that would change the battlefield forever. From the earliest dawns when the first rays of light pierced the war-torn skies over northern France, the air seemed to vibrate with mechanical rhythm, the low hum of engines stretching like a pulse across the countryside. German generals, ensconced in their bunkers and observation posts, squinted through binoculars at the endless parade of olive-drab trucks moving in relentless cadence, each one carrying the precious fuel, munitions, and supplies that would breathe life into Patton's armored divisions. These vehicles were more than mere transport. They were the arteries of an army that refused to falter, weaving an intricate web of logistics that no enemy plan could sever. Soldiers and mechanics worked in ceaseless rotation, replacing tires, repairing engines, and patching bullet-scarred chassis with a precision that defied the chaos surrounding them. Roads that had been blasted into rubble became thoroughfares of ingenuity, lined with improvised bridges, detours, and hastily repaired culverts, allowing convoys to surge forward as if the very terrain itself bent to American will. The generals could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had long considered supply chains the fragile backbone of any offensive, expecting breakdowns, shortages, and delays to cripple an advancing army. Yet here was a machine that mocked their assumptions, moving with a combination of audacity, discipline, and sheer mechanical tenacity that was almost frightening in its predictability and reliability. Whispers passed from officer to officer, laced with incredulity. Could such an endless stream of fuel and ammunition truly continue without interruption? And if it did, what would it mean when it converged upon the front lines with all the speed and force of Patton's armor? The sheer scale of the Red Ball Express was staggering. Trucks moved not in haphazard clusters, but in disciplined columns, their drivers aware that a single delay or misstep could ripple back through the chain, jeopardizing the operational tempo of an entire division. Fuel tankers rumbled past, carrying enough gasoline to power tanks across dozens of miles, while ammunition carriers trundled forward with lethal precision, each shell destined to explode in a symphony of destruction that would redefine the battlefield. Mechanics worked feverishly at makeshift garages, often under cover of darkness, patching up vehicles damaged by overuse, enemy fire, or treacherous terrain. Drivers slept in shifts, snatching brief rest between deliveries, their fatigue tempered by a sense of duty and the adrenaline of an army moving faster than history had ever known. This was not mere logistics. It was a ballet of speed, endurance, and coordination, each movement choreographed to ensure that Patton's divisions could strike at a tempo that the Germans could not anticipate or match. And yet, despite the visible efficiency, the Americans themselves knew the operation was an audacious gamble. Roads were narrow and treacherous, convoys vulnerable to ambushes, and mechanical failures inevitable. But each challenge was met with ingenuity, improvisation, and relentless drive, a testament to an army that had learned to turn supply into weaponized momentum. Meanwhile, the German command struggled to comprehend the implications. Generals who had spent years orchestrating campaigns based on attrition, fortifications, and carefully measured supply lines found themselves confronted with a form of warfare they had never imagined. The concept of a supply line that could outrun their attacks, repair itself under fire, and keep an army moving at breakneck speed was alien, almost heretical. Every failed airstrike or ambush against the convoys deepened their frustration, while every successfully delivered fuel truck meant tanks would keep rolling, artillery would keep firing, and Patton's divisions would maintain an unrelenting push that no counteroffensive could stall. In command rooms across Normandy and the Ardennes, generals pored over maps, marking the relentless advance of convoys with red pencils, their faces etched with disbelief. Calculations that had once seemed reliable now crumbled under the realization that American ingenuity had rewritten the rules of operational warfare. Intelligence reports described the rhythm, scale, and audacity of the Red Ball Express in almost mythical terms. Columns stretching for miles, drivers navigating shattered roads at night, and supply depots functioning as if powered by some invisible engine of efficiency. The generals realized too late that they were facing more than an army. They were facing the embodiment of logistical innovation made flesh, a force capable of sustaining momentum far beyond the capacity of conventional military planning. Every day, stories filtered back from the front lines, anecdotes that only added to the mystique and dread surrounding the operation. One report told of a single convoy delivering enough fuel and ammunition to keep an entire armored division operational for a week, despite repeated attempts by German units to intercept or disrupt it. Another recounted how mechanics had repaired engines in the middle of a forest, under intermittent fire, allowing vehicles to continue their journey with barely a pause. Drivers navigated bomb-cratered roads with an almost supernatural instinct, avoiding hazards and maintaining formation in a dance of precision that seemed preternatural to the German observers. The sheer audacity of moving massive quantities of supplies across hostile terrain under constant threat of attack and doing so with clockwork regularity became a legend in itself. And yet behind every story, there was the hum of engines, the smell of diesel, and the sight of men pushing themselves and their machines beyond all conceivable limits, a living testament to the idea that logistics could become the defining weapon of a campaign. The generals, watching from their fortified posts, felt a mix of disbelief, fear, and grudging admiration. Each successful delivery chipped away at their assumptions, while simultaneously planting the seeds of a realization that the war they thought they understood was changing before their eyes. Even as the convoys pressed forward through bombed-out towns and shell-scarred countryside, the Americans faced challenges that would have broken lesser armies. Roads were often little more than craters and mud, twisted by shell fire and heavy bombardment, yet trucks laden with hundreds of gallons of fuel and tons of ammunition seemed almost to glide over the terrain, propelled by determination and necessity. Mechanics and drivers improvised tirelessly. Makeshift winches hauled vehicles from ditches, tires were swapped with remarkable speed, and engines were cannibalized from disabled trucks to keep others moving. Each successful delivery was not merely a logistical victory, but a psychological one. The Wehrmacht's anticipation of halted offensives and supply shortages evaporated with each passing convoy. Meanwhile, German reconnaissance patrols, lurking in the shadows of forests or perched on ruined rooftops, watched helplessly as the supply lines surged past, elusive and untouchable, mocking their every plan. Intelligence reports trickled back, filled with figures that seemed impossible. Thousands of trucks, hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel, and the constant forward movement of artillery and rations, all orchestrated with a precision that seemed almost superhuman. For German generals, the realization was crushing. The Americans had turned a fundamental weakness of warfare, logistics, into a weapon more potent than any tank or artillery. Barrage they had faced. At the heart of the operation was the extraordinary ingenuity and stamina of the American soldiers themselves. Drivers were rotated in shifts that pushed human endurance to the limit, sleeping in jeeps, tents, or alongside the road in fleeting moments of rest before resuming their journey. They faced the constant threat of ambushes, air attacks, and the treacherous terrain that could swallow a convoy without warning. Yet morale remained high, fueled by the knowledge that every successful delivery kept Patton's armored divisions moving, striking deep into enemy territory. Mechanics and support personnel worked in tandem, often in freezing rain or blistering heat, repairing engines with whatever parts they could salvage, welding, replacing, and improvising to ensure that no truck was left behind. The roads themselves became almost characters in this drama, winding, broken, and dangerous, yet alive with the movement of machines and men, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the force driving them forward. The Americans did not merely survive these challenges, they thrived on them, turning potential catastrophe into a demonstration of ingenuity and willpower, a continuous performance that would astonish both allies and enemies alike. Meanwhile, German commanders tried in vain to disrupt the unstoppable flow. Bombing runs targeted bridges and supply depots, yet the Americans had anticipated most attacks, rerouting convoys, repairing damage with astonishing speed, and moving supplies through alternate routes almost as soon as problems arose. German spies and reconnaissance patrols attempted ambushes, but the sheer discipline and coordination of the Red Ball Express made such attempts futile. Drivers adapted to sudden threats, speeding past gunfire, and convoy commanders rerouted on the fly, relying on a combination of pre-planned contingencies and instinctive decision-making honed through relentless practice. The effect on German morale was profound. Once confident that they could slow Patton's advance through sabotage and attrition, they now faced the unsettling truth that the Americans were not just moving, they were anticipating, adapting and striking with an almost preternatural understanding of the battlefield. Every successful delivery reinforced the Americans' momentum, making the generals' strategies increasingly irrelevant. Even the smallest details contributed to the operation's success. Fuel was rationed, timed, and loaded with precision, ensuring that tanks, half-tracks, and artillery never paused for lack of energy. Ammunition was stacked carefully, tracked meticulously, and distributed according to the exact needs of advancing units. Food, water, and medical supplies flowed alongside munitions, sustaining soldiers who were constantly on the move. Dispatchers worked tirelessly, coordinating routes, communicating breakdowns, and ensuring that every convoy maintained optimal speed and spacing to avoid bottlenecks or vulnerability. Maps were annotated, contingency plans were drawn, and yet despite the rigorous planning, flexibility remained the guiding principle. When obstacles arose, improvisation became the rule. Broken bridges were bypassed, blocked roads cleared, and vehicles repaired on site, all with astonishing speed. The Germans could not keep up. Each attempt to slow the Red Ball Express only highlighted its resilience, turning what they had assumed was a vulnerability into a strength that seemed almost invincible. Stories of individual heroism became legend among the convoys. A driver navigating a flooded section of road, headlights barely piercing the darkness, managed to deliver vital fuel despite near-catastrophic skids and engine stalls. Mechanics repaired engines mid-convoy under the threat of shelling, welding, and replacing parts in minutes that would have taken hours under normal conditions. Dispatchers rerouted entire divisions of vehicles with nothing more than hurried notes and shouted instructions, preventing what could have been logistical collapse. Each act, repeated hundreds of times daily, reinforced the unstoppable nature of the Red Ball Express. German generals, watching helplessly from their command posts, recorded every incident with mounting alarm, realizing that the Americans were not merely conducting logistics, they were orchestrating a symphony of endurance, ingenuity, and sheer willpower that redefined operational warfare. By now, even the frontline soldiers felt the weight of this unstoppable machine. Tanks continued rolling without pause, artillery fired relentlessly, and infantry moved forward sustained by the continuous influx of supplies. The Red Ball Express had become a lifeline, a pulse that kept the army alive and advancing. Any attempt to slow or halt this movement failed, reinforcing a psychological edge over the Germans that was as vital as any physical advantage. For the American soldiers, exhaustion and danger were tempered by purpose. Every mile conquered, every successful delivery, was a victory in itself, contributing to an unstoppable momentum that would soon shock the world. German generals, once confident in their mastery of the battlefield, now faced an unprecedented reality. The Red Ball Express was more than trucks and fuel. It was a revolution in warfare, one that they could observe but not control, a force of nature that would power Patton's fury and redefine the very rules of combat. As Patton surveyed the map in his command tent, the scale and audacity of the operation came sharply into focus. Each line on the chart represented not just the movement of men and vehicles, but a heartbeat of momentum, a surge of power that no static defensive line could hope to withstand. He knew the importance of keeping this pulse alive. The Red Ball Express was not merely a support system, it was the lifeblood of his advance, the invisible force driving every strike, every maneuver, every thunderous roar of tank fire. Patton's eyes traced the convoys snaking across the countryside, noting bottlenecks, potential hazards, and vulnerabilities, yet his mind was equally focused on exploiting the rhythm of the operation to overwhelm the Germans. Speed, endurance, and relentless pressure were his weapons. The trucks and drivers of the Red Ball Express were his allies, moving with precision and purpose that allowed him to concentrate firepower on critical points without ever slowing the advance. The generals of the Wehrmacht, meanwhile, were forced to watch helplessly, unable to disrupt a system they did not fully understand, one that seemed immune to conventional tactics or sabotage. Each successful delivery reinforced Patton's ability to strike with maximum force, while each failure on the German side deepened the sense of inevitability that would define the campaign. The convoys themselves became the stage for extraordinary feats of human endurance and courage. Drivers navigated shattered roads, dodging craters, twisted steel, and the occasional strafing run from Luftwaffe fighters. Mechanics repaired engines under fire, improvising with whatever materials were at hand to ensure that no truck was left behind. Dispatchers coordinated movements with split-second timing, rerouting entire convoys around destroyed bridges or mined roads, their commands delivered through shouted orders, hand signals, and makeshift radios. Each successful delivery was a triumph not just of technology, but of sheer willpower, a testament to the American Army's capacity to adapt, endure, and persevere in conditions that would have broken lesser forces. Even when accidents occurred, trucks sliding into ditches, fuel tanks rupturing, or wheels shearing off, the teams responded with ingenuity and speed, minimizing losses and keeping the arteries of supply flowing without interruption. The spectacle was almost mythical in scale. Hundreds of trucks, thousands of miles of roads, and an unbroken chain of movement that the Germans could observe but could not touch. German commanders attempted increasingly desperate measures to disrupt the operation. Ambushes, artillery strikes, and sabotage missions were launched against convoys, yet each effort was met with improvisation and adaptability that left them frustrated and demoralized. Bridges were quickly rebuilt, blocked roads cleared, and convoys rerouted at the last minute. Even when vehicles broke down, mechanics and drivers worked in tandem to restore movement within hours, maintaining the tempo that Patton demanded. Intelligence reports filled command posts with astonishing statistics: thousands of miles covered per day, hundreds of vehicles operational, and near-constant delivery of fuel and munitions that allowed the armored divisions to strike repeatedly without pause. The generals could not comprehend it. Their conventional understanding of supply lines and logistics had failed them. Every attempt to slow the Red Ball Express only demonstrated its resilience, reinforcing the notion that the Americans had transformed a supposed vulnerability into the greatest strategic advantage of the campaign. The Wehrmacht's confidence faltered, replaced by anxiety and awe as they realized that their enemies had rewritten the rules of war through organization, innovation, and sheer determination. Amid the chaos and movement, individual stories added texture and suspense to the operation. A driver navigating a night convoy through bombed-out villages kept the headlights low to avoid detection, heart pounding as mortar shells landed nearby. A mechanic repaired an engine mid-convoy, welding under darkness while bullets whizzed past, knowing that failure would halt the advance of an entire division. Dispatchers juggled route changes, broken radios, and fatigue with uncanny efficiency, ensuring that every truck reached its destination. Soldiers on the front lines relied on these deliveries, the fuel and ammunition flowing like a lifeline that allowed them to press forward with confidence. Each incident, no matter how small, became a testament to the extraordinary human effort sustaining the Red Ball Express. And each near miss heightened the tension, the suspense, and the drama, making the operation not just a logistical achievement, but a narrative of courage, endurance, and ingenuity on a scale rarely seen in human history. The effect on German morale was profound. Generals who had once scoffed at American logistics now faced the horrifying reality that their calculations were obsolete. Every attack on the supply lines failed, every ambush was anticipated or circumvented, and every convoy delivered its precious cargo, reinforcing the unstoppable momentum of Patton's advance. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical, as soldiers and officers alike began to internalize the sense of inevitability surrounding the Red Ball Express. What had seemed like a routine support operation now appeared as a force of nature, an unrelenting tide that powered the offensive with a consistency and speed that the Wehrmacht could neither match nor predict. Even the most seasoned commanders found themselves questioning whether their understanding of warfare had become outdated in a single campaign, confronted with a combination of industrial might, human ingenuity, and tactical brilliance that redefined the battlefield. By the time the convoys reached the front lines, the Americans had achieved something extraordinary. Tanks rolled without pause, artillery fired relentlessly, and infantry advanced with confidence, all sustained by the continuous influx of supplies. Patton's forces moved faster than the Germans could respond, exploiting every weakness and seizing the initiative at every turn. The Red Ball Express had become more than a supply line. It was a weapon, a symbol, and a force multiplier, enabling operational tempo that reshaped the European theater. German generals, once confident in their superiority, now faced the realization that their enemy had turned logistics into a strategic advantage so profound that it threatened to render traditional military thinking obsolete. Each mile conquered, each delivery made, each convoy that reached its destination without fail was another step toward the inevitable collapse of German resistance in the face of an American army operating at unprecedented efficiency and determination. As the sun set on yet another day of relentless movement, the generals retreated to their maps, haunted by the relentless pulse of engines and the knowledge that Patton's advance showed no sign of slowing. The Red Ball Express continued to flow. A river of trucks, fuel, ammunition, and supplies, powered by human courage, mechanical ingenuity, and the strategic brilliance of commanders who understood the importance of speed and adaptability. Every attempt to disrupt it had failed, every calculated attack had been anticipated, and every failure on the German side only reinforced the unstoppable momentum of the American advance. In the silence of the night, punctuated only by the distant hum of engines, a sobering realization took hold. The Wehrmacht had underestimated the Americans, not in courage or firepower, but in their ability to transform logistics into a weapon capable of reshaping the battlefield. And in that realization, Patton's fury surged forward, powered by the invisible but omnipresent lifeblood of the Red Ball Express, unstoppable, relentless, and destined to redefine warfare itself. From the first light breaking over the shattered roads of northern France, the engines of the Red Ball Express roared to life with an almost sentient rhythm, carrying a lifeblood of fuel, ammunition, and supplies that would define the speed and ferocity of Patton's advance. German generals, still reeling from the shock of the previous day's relentless convoys, could only watch helplessly as the Americans executed movements that defied conventional logic. Trucks surged in disciplined formations, weaving through bomb-cratered towns, across ruined bridges, and over open fields, each vehicle bearing its precious cargo with mechanical precision. The drivers, many of them barely trained, relied on instinct, maps, and nerves of steel to navigate routes constantly threatened by enemy action. Mechanics worked tirelessly at roadside repair points, welding, patching, and replacing engines, often under the threat of artillery fire, ensuring that no vehicle was left behind. Each delivery was not only a logistical victory, but a strategic one, enabling Patton's armored divisions to strike with unprecedented speed and intensity, a pace that left German strategists scrambling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Suspense clung to every mile, every turn, and every engine roar, as though the land itself had become a stage for a relentless, unstoppable symphony of American resolve and a might. The heart of the Red Ball Express was a combination of meticulous planning and improvisational genius that created an operational tempo the Wehrmacht had never encountered. Convoys were scheduled to the minute, with dispatchers coordinating hundreds of vehicles across multiple routes to avoid bottlenecks, ambushes, and mechanical failures. Fuel tankers carried just enough to keep tanks moving without overloading, while ammunition carriers were calculated to meet precise combat demands. Food, water, and medical supplies were distributed with equal care, ensuring that infantry could maintain their relentless pace alongside the armored columns. Even minor mechanical failures were treated with urgency. A broken axle or engine was repaired on the spot, salvaged from disabled trucks or improvised with spare parts, minimizing any potential delays. This orchestration of logistics under pressure became a kind of warfare in itself, as each successfully delivered supply reinforced Patton's operational advantage, keeping his divisions in motion and denying the Germans any opportunity to regroup or counterattack. The general's disbelief grew with every passing hour, a mix of astonishment, fear, and grudging respect for a system that seemed almost impossible to halt. The human dimension of the Red Ball Express was equally critical. Drivers endured exhausting shifts, often driving through the night with little rest, their focus sharpened by the stakes of the mission. Mechanics and repair crews labored in unforgiving conditions, patching engines in the cold, mud, and rain, aware that the fate of entire divisions depended on their skill and determination. Dispatchers, often working from hastily constructed headquarters, coordinated complex rerouting operations in real time, balancing risk and reward as vehicles navigated through mined roads, bombed-out bridges, and enemy patrols. Soldiers on the front lines relied on these deliveries as their lifeline, their ability to continue the assault dependent on the uninterrupted flow of fuel and ammunition. Each successful mile, each repaired vehicle, and each delivery became a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance, a narrative that amplified the suspense and cinematic drama of the campaign. The Germans, meanwhile, faced growing anxiety and frustration, as every attempt to intercept or disrupt the supply lines ended in failure, reinforcing the Americans' strategic superiority. As the Red Ball Express pressed deeper into enemy territory, the impact on the battlefield became unmistakable. Tanks moved faster, artillery fired more consistently, and infantry advanced with renewed vigor, all sustained by a continuous flow of supplies. The operation's success was not accidental. It was a deliberate orchestration of resources, planning, and human effort that transformed logistics into a decisive instrument of war. German generals, observing from their command posts, could only watch in disbelief as Patton's forces maintained a tempo that no one had predicted, exploiting every advantage and striking with an intensity that left defenders disoriented and demoralized. The suspense of the campaign, the unpredictability of each mile, and the relentless pressure of American ingenuity combined to create a narrative that was as much psychological as it was tactical. By the end of the day, it was clear. The Red Ball Express was not merely a supply operation. It was the engine of momentum, the invisible force that powered Patton's fury, and a lesson in the transformative power of logistics that would redefine the conduct of war. Even as the convoys surged across the fractured countryside, each mile told a story of human endurance and mechanical ingenuity that seemed almost supernatural to German observers. Drivers maneuvered massive trucks through craters, collapsed bridges, and bombed out towns, relying on intuition honed by hours of relentless practice. Engines groaned under the weight of fuel and munitions, yet mechanics worked tirelessly alongside the roads, repairing axles, welding ruptured chassis, and replacing tires with astonishing speed. Every obstacle became a test of improvisation. A flooded ford was crossed using makeshift rafts, a damaged road bypassed with temporary wooden bridges, and vehicles stuck in mud dragged free by others, engines roaring in tandem to generate the necessary force. The convoy was not merely a line of trucks. It was a living, breathing organism, constantly adapting to threats, obstacles, and unforeseen events. The Germans, watching from observation points, could do nothing but document the movement in growing disbelief, recognizing with unease that this logistical marvel had become an unstoppable engine propelling Patton's forces forward. Each successful delivery reinforced the rhythm of momentum, creating a psychological and tactical advantage that was impossible to counter with conventional strategies. At the core of this operation was a delicate balance between planning and improvisation. Dispatchers coordinated hundreds of vehicles over multiple routes, ensuring minimal delay even when roads collapsed or enemy fire threatened the convoys. Fuel, carefully rationed, flowed just enough to keep tanks moving without overburdening the trucks, while ammunition was distributed precisely according to the demands of advancing units. Food, water, and medical supplies accompanied munitions, sustaining soldiers who were constantly on the move. When a mechanical failure occurred, it was treated with urgency. Spare engines and parts were cannibalized from disabled trucks. Mechanics worked in shifts to restore movement, and drivers adjusted to new schedules with remarkable flexibility. The American Army had transformed logistics into a weapon, converting a vulnerability into a decisive advantage. German generals, once confident in their ability to exploit conventional weaknesses, now faced a force that combined speed, endurance, and ingenuity in a way they could neither predict nor halt. Suspense lingered with every mile as the threat of ambush or breakdown was always present. Yet the Red Ball Express pressed forward, unbroken and unstoppable. The human element of the Red Ball Express was equally extraordinary. Drivers often operated in near-total exhaustion, navigating treacherous roads at night with only dim headlights and scant sleep. Mechanics labored under extreme conditions, welding and repairing engines while under threat from artillery, snipers, or strafing aircraft. Dispatchers worked tirelessly to reroute vehicles around hazards, balance the flow of resources, and ensure the precise timing needed for operational efficiency. Soldiers at the front relied on this continuous supply, knowing that without fuel, ammunition, and provisions, even the most formidable offensive could stall. Individual acts of courage punctuated the operation. A driver salvaging a stalled fuel truck under enemy fire, a mechanic improvising a repair with nothing more than a welding torch and scraps of metal, or a dispatcher rerouting a convoy to avoid a freshly mined bridge. Each act, repeated hundreds of times, underscored the ingenuity, adaptability, and courage that powered the Red Ball Express. Making it far more than a supply operation, it became a living testament to human resolve under fire. Meanwhile, German counter-efforts grew increasingly desperate. Reconnaissance patrols attempted ambushes on bridges and choke points, while Luftwaffe bombers targeted supply depots with little effect. Artillery barrages attempted to sever the convoy routes, yet Americans repaired roads, rerouted vehicles, and replaced destroyed infrastructure faster than the Germans could act. Even when a convoy was temporarily delayed or partially destroyed, its impact was quickly mitigated by alternate routes and rapid mechanical intervention. Each failure on the German side only emphasized the adaptability and resilience of the American operation, deepening the sense of inevitability for the Wehrmacht. Observers documented the relentless tempo of trucks rolling day and night, the synchronization of delivery schedules, and the human ingenuity driving the system. By the time convoys reached frontline units, the impact was undeniable. Tanks continued rolling, artillery fired without pause, and infantry advanced sustained by an unbroken chain of supply. Suspense remained ever present, as each delivery represented the thin line between momentum and potential chaos. Yet the Americans managed to maintain perfect continuity, an unstoppable force driving Patton's campaign forward with unparalleled speed. The effect on the battlefield was transformative. The Red Ball Express enabled a tempo of operations that the Germans had never anticipated. Tanks moved without delay, artillery could sustain bombardments, and infantry maintained relentless pressure, all while the Wehrmacht struggled to mount effective resistance. Patton's operational philosophy, rapid, decisive strikes, was fully realized because his army could rely on an uninterrupted flow of supplies, a strategic advantage that turned logistics into a decisive weapon. Every mile conquered by the convoys reinforced the psychological advantage, as German forces realized that no amount of planning, sabotage, or attrition could slow the American advance. Suspense and tension permeated every aspect of the operation, from the precarious crossing of destroyed bridges to the silent nights when drivers navigated unlit roads under threat of attack. The Red Ball Express had become more than trucks and supplies. It was the engine of momentum, a force that reshaped the battlefield and redefined the possibilities of warfare in the modern era. As Patton reviewed his operational maps under the dim light of his command tent, he considered the pulse of the Red Ball Express not merely a logistical necessity, but the very lifeblood of his advance. Every line, every route marked on the charts represented more than trucks and fuel. It represented mobility, firepower, and the unrelenting pressure he could bring to bear on German defenses. Patton's strategy depended entirely on sustaining momentum, and the Red Ball Express had become the invisible engine powering it. Convoys delivered fuel to tanks just hours before they would roll into battle, ammunition to artillery batteries to sustain continuous bombardment, and rations to infantry advancing in harsh conditions. The speed, precision, and scale of the operation were unprecedented, and Patton understood that his division's success relied entirely on maintaining this relentless tempo. The German generals, watching from their observation posts, could only gape in disbelief, unable to halt a system so finely tuned and resilient that each disruption they attempted seemed only to highlight its strength. Suspense hung in the air like the tension before a storm. Every convoy represented a potential catastrophe narrowly avoided. Yet the Americans pressed forward, unstoppable and resolute. Drivers and mechanics alike faced extreme conditions. Their courage and ingenuity tested continuously. Trucks laden with fuel barreled across narrow, cratered roads. Wheels slipped into mud, axles bent under weight, and engines threatened to seize from continuous overuse. Yet mechanics patched, welded, and improvised with relentless determination, ensuring that no vehicle was left immobile for long. Drivers navigated night convoys with headlights dimmed to avoid detection, crossing fields littered with debris and bomb craters, often guided only by the stars and fragmented maps. Dispatchers rerouted vehicles at a moment's notice, juggling priorities and risks, ensuring that supplies reached exactly where they were needed. Each successful mile reinforced the unstoppable momentum of Patton's forces, while each minor mishap highlighted the skill and resilience of the personnel keeping the system alive. German officers, expecting delays and breakdowns to slow the advance, were forced to confront a reality they had never imagined: an army capable of turning logistics into an unbroken weapon of war. Extreme challenges became opportunities for improvisation and heroism. A convoy trapped by a collapsed bridge saw drivers fashion a temporary wooden crossing in the dark, moving vehicles one by one while under intermittent artillery fire. Mechanics salvaged parts from damaged trucks to repair others, welding and replacing components in a matter of hours that would have taken days under normal circumstances. Fuel tankers, often riddled with bullet holes, continued their journeys with patched tanks and patched nerves. Even when Luftwaffe fighters strafed the convoys, drivers accelerated and maneuvered with instinctive precision, keeping the lifeline to the front lines unbroken. Each successful delivery became a psychological weapon, as well as a logistical one, reinforcing the belief among soldiers that nothing could halt their advance. German generals, monitoring these feats, recorded reports filled with disbelief and frustration, noting the efficiency, adaptability, and sheer audacity of the operation. Every failure they had anticipated did not occur. Every contingency they had planned for was outpaced by American ingenuity. Suspense remained palpable with every mile, as the line between disaster and triumph was razor thin. Yet the Red Ball Express maintained an unbroken rhythm. By mid-campaign, the scale of the Red Ball Express was staggering. Convoys traversed hundreds of miles daily, delivering thousands of gallons of fuel, tons of ammunition, and countless provisions to keep Patton's divisions operational. Roads that had been obliterated by bombardment were quickly repaired or bypassed. Bridges collapsed under weight were rebuilt using planks, sandbags, and sheer determination. Each route required precise coordination, as delays could ripple through the system, threatening operational tempo. Drivers faced exhaustion, harsh weather, and enemy threats, yet their commitment never wavered. Mechanics and dispatchers adapted continuously, employing creative solutions to unprecedented problems. Soldiers at the front lines relied entirely on this flow of supplies. Tanks could not advance without fuel, artillery could not fire without ammunition, and infantry could not press forward without rations and water. The Red Ball Express had become the invisible force that powered Patton's fury, turning a supply network into a decisive weapon of war. German generals, once confident in their ability to stall the advance through attrition and sabotage, were forced to accept that they faced an unstoppable momentum. As the operation progressed, reports of near disasters added suspense and highlighted human ingenuity. One convoy encountered a minefield, which destroyed several vehicles, yet drivers and mechanics worked under fire to remove wreckage and repair the road, restoring the convoy's flow within hours. Another convoy faced a sudden Luftwaffe attack. Fuel tankers, heavily damaged, were guided through alternate routes while mechanics patched engines on the move. Dispatchers rerouted dozens of vehicles in real time, preventing congestion and potential disaster. These events reinforced the psychological edge of the Americans and deepened the frustration of the German high command. The operation was not merely about delivering supplies, it was about maintaining the tempo, exploiting opportunities and sustaining a rhythm of advance that the Germans could neither anticipate nor interrupt. The suspense of every mile, every decision, and every repair added to the narrative tension, making the Red Ball Express both a logistical and cinematic marvel. German counter-efforts reached a crescendo of desperation. Artillery barrages, ambushes, and sabotage missions were launched against supply routes, yet each attempt failed spectacularly. Bridges were repaired in hours, blocked roads cleared, and convoys rerouted with minimal disruption. Intelligence reports documented the relentless pace and coordination of the convoys, leaving German generals both incredulous and panicked. Each failure reinforced the notion that Patton's forces were unstoppable, powered not only by tanks and artillery, but by an invisible, unbroken engine of logistics. The psychological impact was immense. The Wehrmacht could no longer predict or control the tempo of the American advance. Suspense hung over the battlefield, palpable in every German report, every map, and every anxious decision made by commanders who had underestimated the Americans' logistical ingenuity. By the campaign's climax, the Red Ball Express had become legendary. Patton's divisions moved faster than any had expected, striking deep into German-held territory, sustained by a continuous flow of fuel, ammunition, and supplies. Convoys ran day and night, drivers and mechanics pushed beyond exhaustion, and dispatchers maintained flawless coordination. The Wehrmacht's attempts to halt the advance were futile. The Americans' ability to adapt, improvise, and sustain momentum proved decisive. Each successful delivery reinforced the operational tempo. Each heroic act of maintenance or navigation became a testament to human courage, and every mile traveled underscored the strategic advantage gained through logistics. Suspense and drama permeated every aspect of the operation, ensuring that the story of the Red Ball Express was not just a tale of supply lines, but a cinematic narrative of ingenuity, endurance, and unstoppable momentum. As the sun set over the French countryside, the German generals were left with a sobering realization. They had underestimated the Americans' capacity to turn logistics into a weapon. Patton's forces, powered by the unbroken rhythm of the Red Ball Express, continued their relentless advance, striking with precision, speed, and a confidence that seemed almost superhuman. Each mile conquered, each supply delivered, and each obstacle overcome reinforced the unstoppable force that was the Red Ball Express. Suspense lingered in every convoy, every repair, and every maneuver, a constant reminder of the razor-thin line between disaster and triumph. By the end of the day, the lesson was clear. The Red Ball Express was more than a supply network. It was the engine of momentum, the invisible force powering Patton's fury, and a decisive factor that would redefine the conduct of modern warfare forever.